Oftentimes when people think about marketing, and especially founders, you specialize, you have this product, especially when it's either a service or it's a digital product, people think about marketing as everything that happens until the click to purchase, until the purchase online. But they completely forget everything after the click.
Sometimes we have an idea of certain terms and what they mean, but I'd love to hear how you kind of speak to and define system thinking.
For me, system thinking is...
Today on the podcast, we'll be talking to Nadja Fromm. Nadja is founder of Fromm Consulting, and she brings several years of Fortune 100 experience to the table. We're going to talk to her about the importance of changing the perception around marketing that often exists in organizations and making sure that proper perception leads to marketing's ability to lead the charge in those organizations. We're also going to talk about collaboration and how it's key and how you can use system thinking to really foster a spirit of collaboration among those who you're working with. And then we're going to talk about proper perspective, how it's important to look at the entire customer lifecycle. And by having that proper perspective as a starting point, we're able to deliver powerful and impactful digital customer experiences. We're very happy to be talking to Nadja today. Let's get started. Nadja, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. We know this has been a long time coming, but now we're here and we're excited to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Shamir. Really excited. I was really looking forward to this one.
As you know, our podcast really focuses on that digital customer experience, and in particular, that post-click experience that's so critically important for marketers to really kind of grasp onto. It's where we get our messaging across. It's where we get our value proposition across. It's where we help people make the decisions we want them to make so that they ultimately become not just customers, but hopefully loyal customers, right? That they really look to build value in the long term with the brands that they're working with and engaging with. But I know with your varied experience in marketing, you've kind of seen various shades and various colors at some very, very large brands. And I know one of the things that you and I have talked about before, just even before this podcast, is how marketers tend to kind of allow themselves to be relegated into kind of the pretty picture group, right? People just think about marketing as this kind of creative thing, maybe some brand aspects of it, but it doesn't really get deeper than that, where marketing really needs to get much deeper than that in order to accomplish what it should be looking to accomplish and kind of really impact the business and the organization that marketers truly want to. I wonder, in your experience, first of all, why does that happen? Why does marketing get so quickly relegated to kind of like, yeah, those guys just make things look good, but they're not really providing any substance to the business?
I think that's a really good place to start for us, I think, because in my career, I think of over 2 decades on all sides of the spectrum of marketing, advertising agencies, corporate, all the ways from really small companies all the way up to the Fortune 100s. What for me was always standing out is that when you identify yourself as marketing, it's always the one, it's the PowerPoint presentations, right? It's the pretty pictures. It's the one that, you make the logos and all that. And I do think that is in a way fault to just the way you present. Oftentimes the idea is too short. And I do think that it oftentimes comes in a way, it starts with the lack of collaboration. And it starts often with the lack of system thinking. And if I just take an example, if you think about, bringing a new product to market, right? The number of departments that it really takes to be successful, and in a way where it starts usually is marketing. You have a new idea, and ideally it is rooted in the consumer insight, and there's a need, and there's a gap in the market, and we identify it from a consumer observation. And then marketing has this idea, and we throw out a projection of X million dollars and X market share. And then marketing just slaps it on a PowerPoint, and then sales hears about it, and then, procurement hears about it, and then forecasting hears about it. And it's always after the fact. But if you do it really right out of the gate, you would talk about this with all departments. But where do you start? And that is oftentimes, the bigger the organization, the harder. And that is really something where, in the end, it's always this rumor mill, and there's this PowerPoint slide that gets handed around the organization. And I do think that is where this comes from, that Marketing, oh, it's the pretty pictures, is that PowerPoint slide, because the conversation at the very root does not happen early enough. I do think that is oftentimes where it starts, at least in my experience, especially when the company is really big, because you just don't know who to talk to first. That's, I think, one of the biggest challenges.
No, I'm glad you said that because, collaboration is something that is a theme that comes up a lot on the podcast, and it rightfully should, because it takes that level of alignment to be able to get that experience that you want to deliver to the customers to be what you want it to be. It's never something that can happen in a silo. Marketing certainly contributes heavily to that. I would even argue maybe marketing kind of should be the one carrying the flag and taking the lead on that. But that alignment with IT and with product and with all these other groups, engineering, data, right? All these other groups within the organization is so critically important. So if you're going to be the flag bearer, if you're going to kind of come in the room and say, hey, this is what we need to do, this is what the customer is telling us, this is where we need to lead the charge and lead the way, then you've got to be the kind of leader that understands your troops, so to speak, that shows a lot of respect for them, that understands the value they bring to the table. And if you rolled all this down to some pretty pictures in a slide deck, that might not get, that might not show you respect them, and it might not let them respect you back, right? I'm kind of wondering, as you've dealt with and been a part of many, I'm sure, cross-functional teams, even led cross-functional teams, what have you seen to be that kind of mistake that maybe marketing kind of, in terms of how they position themselves or how they maybe talk about the challenges, the problems, the campaigns? What is that mistaken language that you think they use where they kind of lose the room, so to speak, and don't allow teams to kind of align cross-functionally?
The biggest mistake that I've seen marketers made is assuming that they know everything and assuming that marketing is the middle and the center of everything. And quite frankly, it is not. The consumer should be at the middle and the center of everything. The consumer, the client, whatever your end consumer is, whenever you talk about the end user of your product, they should be at the center. Not marketing, not you, not your CEO, not your stakeholder. So get rid of all of that. But the biggest issue you can really make as a marketeer is pretending that you know everything and pretending and assuming that you think that you understand how supply chain work, that you think you understand how sales work, because you don't. You don't. If you haven't done that role into the depth, if you haven't transitioned from a cross-functional role, then you don't. So it is really important for you to acknowledge that I don't know how your job works, but help me understand what is it that I need to know. Help me understand how can this product launch, this whatever project it is, how can this be most successful for the company, for the consumer, for the stakeholder? Help me understand is the most powerful sentence that you can use. Help me understand.
I love that. I absolutely love that. I've seen so many instances, and I'm sure you have too, where a marketing leader will come in the room and be essentially just giving orders. And this especially I've seen a lot when it comes to technical teams, when it comes to, maybe IT or engineering, and just kind of saying, this is what I want you to do. This is what I want you to build. This is what I want you to buy, without getting their expertise, without getting their understanding, their context or their buy-in to it. And then I've seen literally hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you might as well just let the money on fire, just wasted because of not properly kind of collaborating and understanding and saying, hey, this is the problem I'm trying to solve. Fine to come to the table with ideas, but saying, now I need your expertise and feedback, and saying, how do we solve this? How do we design? How do we build a solution to this problem together to be able to move things forward in solving it? And it's funny because, marketing and sales obviously are very closely related. And, as a marketer, when you have an idea, in essence, you kind of have to be that salesperson, right? You kind of have to go into the room and kind of market your idea, so to speak, and kind of get everyone on the same page. The same way you want to get the customer, bought in and on the same page and seeing the value in what you're offering. You want to get the people in the room on the same page and bought in and seeing the value in what you're offering. And I know that's something you believe in, because you've mentioned this, that 75% of what a marketer has to do is getting that internal buy-in. It's internal sales. What in your experience has led you to kind of come to that conclusion?
Absolutely. I think that's a really valid point. And I do think, just going back to the point to the beginning, what you just mentioned, Um, when you enter a room and you assume that you know everything, you already lose that. You lose that advantage that that you need to take everybody along the journey. You need to have people understand why this is the right decision. And when you start collectively with the common goal that we want to do the best for the consumer, right? We want to do whatever the common mission of the company is, right? Speaking very holistically here. And even if it's in the end making the stakeholder happy, if that's whatever your common goal is, if you can first establish that as the objective, I think that's going to be probably the starting point, right? But I do think as a marketeer, when you start right out of you're early in your career, you do the undergrad, you have your master's degree, and you have, oftentimes people in those really large, the Fortune 100 companies coming from these Ivy League schools. And I've been there seeing those graduate students and coming in and having their degrees and thinking they understand it all, and they don't. And that is oftentimes where a little bit of that very quickly that the whiplash is coming in because the lack of experience is very, very visible very quickly. And so you need to have a little degree, the degree of, being humble about it and saying, I understand the theory, but I also want to learn from the decades of experience in the room. So for me, it is always going back to the part of help me understand and tapping into the collective wisdom of the room. And I do think there's something about the psychology of the collective brilliance of the room and helping people see that you are not just in the room to show everyone how smart you are, but that you have a common goal. And I do think there's something really powerful within that. And yes, it is the part of, bringing the project to life is getting everybody rallied behind that common goal. And that is going back to the 75% of the bringing that project to life is getting everybody behind that. And you have to not only sell the initial idea at budgeting phase, you have to get, your boss behind it, you have to get your team behind it, and all the stakeholders. And every interaction, not just within your team, up, down, sideways, every time you want to start at the starting point is, what is our goal? What is your goal? And also thinking about on an individual level, think about it this way. What time of the year is it? And I'm getting very theoretical here, but what time of the year is this? How close are we to performance reviews? How close is this person potentially to the next promotion? And I'm talking really politically here because I played the games. And especially when it's in bigger companies, a lot of a job is also the politics. If you want to climb the ladder, you're going to play the game too. So if that person is really close to a promotion and there is a certain job open at some point, you got to watch all the chess games on the board. So can you maybe help that person and pull that person in and tap into that intrinsic motivation because they have this, individual development plan, and you can tap into that motivation and pull them in and fire them up? Think strategically. Everybody has an intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation, bonus, looking good in front of the boss is one thing. But what is that intrinsic motivation that everybody brings to work, that everybody brings to the table? And if you can tap into that, both, then you win the room. That's at least how I always won the room.
I think that's such an outstanding way to put it. One of the things that's really come to my top of mind lately for me in these last several years, and of course I'm in consulting agency services, I know you're doing consulting now as well, is you come to realize, yes, of course it's great to kind of walk into the room to talk to a client and say, hey, I want to help you, achieve this particular target in terms of this metric. We want to increase lifetime value. We want to increase conversion rates. We want to increase average order value, all those things. And all those things are wonderful and great, and they're important. But when you as you mentioned, when you really boil it down, that person kind of really doesn't care about those things. I mean, they're usually pretty far disconnected from how much money their Fortune 100 organization is making and how much money, is going to the board or the stockholders. Like, they're disconnected from that. Like, they want to get their paycheck. They want to get their bonus. They want to get home at a decent hour. They want to get that promotion. They want to, they're looking to build a nice portfolio for themselves so they can get that next job, maybe at that next level, right? People are inherently selfish. I mean, we're concerned with ourselves. I mean, and that's appropriate to a degree, right? So, when we try to help people, we understand that, yeah, we're helping the organization, but it's really about helping you, John or Sarah or whatever your name is. What is it that's important to you? And I think taking that same service-minded, we want to serve this person, this individual, taking that same mentality even inside the corporate boardroom, right? When you're the one working with them, as a marketer, for engineering, yeah, they're concerned about, sure, hitting certain milestones or certain service goals or things like that. But to your point, engineering is also concerned about the fact that you just unloaded this project on me and like, I need to get home. Like I got a kid's soccer game to get to. And now you just extended my day by a couple of hours, or wow, this is going to take forever. I was supposed to go on vacation and now I won't go, those are the things that people are thinking about. And I think being able to ground it in the human, in the personal, I think that's just so critically important.
Actually, there's another thing that I just popped up in my mind. Everybody's motivated by different things. And you just mentioned the KPI part. One example I want to throw in as well on top of that is a while back when I was at one of the biggest food companies. You can look me up on LinkedIn and you'll see which one I mean. And we launched a new product. And one of the examples of complete opposite motivations and KPIs and measurements of success was that the sales department is motivated by that the customer is always able to pull this extra case and the extra pallet if they change their mind, and they want to be able that they can always, Costco or, Kroger, they just pulled another pallet. They always want to make sure they have enough on stock in that warehouse. The warehouse, the distribution team, the logistics team, their KPI is that they always have the very, very efficient, they want to have the efficient usage of their pallet spaces. So they're motivated of not having too much inventory sitting around. It's the complete opposite of how success looks like for two departments that should work together. So I just wanted that example just jumped into my mind. That was just a few years ago of two departments yelling on the top of their lungs and having the exact opposite KPIs. Isn't that crazy?
It's absolutely crazy. And, I love that example because it really illustrates a common problem for a lot of our listeners in that, in an ideal world, you hope that leadership is saying, this is where we want to go as a business and as an organization. And then those goals, those KPIs, those OKRs, that they all kind of tier down appropriately. And this is how this impacts engineering, and this is how this impacts supply chain, and this is how this impacts marketing. And all those things have been super thought out, and they're perfectly in line so that if engineering is hitting their goal and marketing is hitting their goal and supply chain is hitting their goal, then it's going to all work out beautifully. And it's going to be just, Shangri-La and, bunnies and rainbows. And I mean, I have never, ever worked in an organization where it's ever worked out like that. And I fathom to imagine that the majority of people listening to us today have not worked at that organization either. I'm sure they exist. I just haven't seen it yet. So what you end up having to do as the individual is you got to say, hey, I understand that my goals and your goals run contrary to each other, right? And then you've got to then figure out and say, okay, that's the reality. Like, neither of us can change that. But what can we do to work together to make it so that things are easier for the both of us?
And that's where system thinking comes in. And that's, it comes back to you don't know what you don't know. And oftentimes these two departments don't know why this other department is so difficult, because they don't know that they are rewarded against the exact opposite KPI. So it starts with the conversation of, listen, here's what's going on. What is the common ground that, again, is the best thing for the brand? What is the best thing for the consumer? What is the middle ground, as you just said? What is the best thing for all of us? And when you can get behind that, when you can have that kind of conversation as the middleman, middle woman, the person in the middle that I always would see marketing. And in my I was the general manager. So I was the person in the middle who said, you know what, let's all come together and have that conversation. If marketing can be that as the owner of the brand, oftentimes we are the brand manager, the product manager, those sorts of roles that our listeners right now probably are. That is our job, to bring these people together and get the best outcome for the company and therefore for the consumer.
Since you're such an expert in it, I'd love for you to first of all, just take a second and kind of, as easily as you can, define system thinking for our audience. I know some people have heard that term before, and sometimes we have an idea of certain terms and what they mean, but I'd love to hear how you kind of speak to and define system thinking.
For me, system thinking is a habit. For me, system thinking is the habit of thinking beyond your own function and proactively seeking an understanding of what other departments and functions do on a daily basis and how your work is affecting all other functions in the organization and how all the individual functions and jobs and down to the individual person are essentially almost like different, like all the little cogs in the engine, how everything all works together. So almost like the butterfly effect, how one person on the production floor is influencing the work of the IT system administrator. That for me is system thinking.
Why have you seen that so, in your opinion, why do you think that's so lacking in so many organizations, this idea of system thinking and kind of putting yourself in the perspective of others?
I do think one is that we are more and more nowadays specialists. We are, look at today's job descriptions, look at today's job title, right? We are just so specialized and degrees you take at the university, it's just so in depth and you get such an expert in your field that is incredibly hard to know everything. And so that's, I think, one element. The other element is that there is this, and maybe that is just here. I mean, I am a European at this point. You probably all picked up my accent. I'm German, and maybe that is just me speaking from my own career because that was all over the place, and from agencies to corporate and then startups, and now I have my own business and all that things. So I saw like all the different things, and it was kind of all over the place. So very non-linear. I do think over here in the US, careers are very linear. You go from, you have your study field and you already know when you go, essentially you have from high school on, kids know exactly what they're going to study. You have your undergrad, you do your internship, and then you have your master's, and then you go your associate and and you really have your career pretty linearly, if that's the word, planned out. And that is for me a path that doesn't really allow you to experience so many side steps. So I feel like that is the other aspect, that the specialization and the other thing is a very linear career path that is looking really fantastic on a resume. But for me, it is just, it's just you missing out. So if you want to be a really good marketeer, if your goal is to be a CMO, VP marketing, CEO, oftentimes marketing is one of those career paths to become a CEO, in my opinion. That was my goal, which I reached, and then, having my own company now, is you want to have a sidestep. Be brave and look at things like sales, finance, logistics, operations, understand those things, and be brave and do a sidestep, one or two. Even lateral moves will strengthen your resume, will strengthen your system thinking, and will give you such rich understanding of how things work, how marketing is influencing everything else in the company. So I think kind of that was a little rabbit hole here, but for me, it's just everything is influencing system thinking. It's one of my favorite topics because in the end, you know, not to drag you down another rabbit hole, but my work nowadays, I now specialize a lot in the neuroscience of business and how mindset and all that is really influencing what we do on a daily basis. 90% is mindset. And our brain, the reticular activating system, our little filter, the bouncer of your brain that decides what goes in, what doesn't go into your brain and your conscious. You can train that filter setting. And when you only surround yourself with the same information, the same knowledge, it's almost like your TikTok algorithm. If you click only on the same kind of content all the time, that is the stuff that is shown. You click on puppy images the whole time, you get puppy memes all day on TikTok. So think about it that way. If you only surround yourself with the same kind of topics and marketing and only hit on the same things, that is what your brain is going to feel familiar and predictable and safe. So that is all you see. And that's all you know. And that is all you're going to be aware of. So expand your horizon by clicking on other things if you expand that theme. So expand your horizon, and then you're going to be able to see and think much more broadly, and you're going to be able to connect the dots and think literally outside the box because your brain is able to see themes that you otherwise would not be able to see.
That's so critically important because as we mentioned at the beginning of our episode, this is about the post-click experience. And I know my big theory on why that gets so little love is because of how complex it gets. Doing creative, doing an ad, relatively speaking, is pretty straightforward and pretty easy. But once you get to that post-click experience, once you start having to deal with the customer on a website or in a mobile app or through a commerce funnel, once you have to actually deal with like shipping and supply chain, all those things get complicated because they involve so many different departments and so many different groups. It touches so many different things. So it's easy to be like, I'm not dealing with that. I'm going to shy away from that, right? As opposed to saying, well, you really need to embrace it if you truly believe the customer needs to be at the center, because the customer doesn't care how many departments there are. They don't care that your goals aren't aligned, right? They don't care that you don't get along with Sam and IT. All they care about is they're spending their money and they want delivered, what they paid for, what they want delivered, which takes, back to your original point, which takes collaboration. It takes a mentality of learning. It takes experimentation, right? To say, how do we continue to adjust and adapt to make sure that we're delivering on what the customer needs to be delivered upon? And how are we doing that? Working together, collaborating together with other teams, because we all play a role in this, and we've got to make the pieces of this puzzle begin to fit together. And I think system thinking is an awesome way to do that, right? That methodology really allows you to better work together and collaborate because of the level of respect and knowledge it brings with all these different cross functions that you as a marketer have to deal with in order to be able to have this great experience. So I wonder, has someone now who's on the consulting side, has you tried to work with the business leaders that you're working with? I know you work with founders, entrepreneurs, and you're trying to help them kind of adopt this thinking in order for them to bring their products to the market, right? In order for them to deliver their message in a cohesive way and in a way that can ultimately scale, right? That's not going to kind of paint them in a corner. Kind of what is your process that you kind of take them through? And obviously, I'm sure we could talk about that process for days on end. But on a high level, what is that process that you take them through to help them kind of appreciate, look, this is the way you need to be thinking about it if you truly want to go down the right path and be successful?
Yeah, I think the way you just described it's so spot on. Oftentimes when people think about marketing, and especially founders, you specialize, you have this product, especially when it's either a service or it's a digital product or it's something that you direct to consumer work and you sell it e-com online. People think about marketing as everything that happens until the click to purchase, until the purchase online, right? That is marketing, great, and now they buy it. But they completely forget everything after the click. And what I work with my founders on, with my clients on, is to think about it completely and holistically. Everything that happens after the click is exactly is also marketing. The consumer experience happens all the way until they buy it, and even after that, to be honest, right? It is the after purchase experience. It is checking in with the consumer after. Hey, how does it feel? How does it do? How do you like it? Right? And the retention. And oftentimes people don't think about it. People forget to follow up. People forget to the nurturing aspect, the following up afterwards, the loyalty aspect, the whole the entire journey of the customer. It is so often that when people think marketing, that they only think about the pretty ad or, the logo or the website. And so when I think about that with my clients, we think about the entire this entire life cycle. Everything, before the click, after the click, the consumption moment, and then afterwards. How do you make sure that they come back? Because as you know, if you think about yourself as a consumer, right? It doesn't stop when you buy something. It is when it is on my desk. How do I make sure that it come back? How do I make sure that I'm buying something else? How do you make sure that you expand the share of market, that I'm going to buy something else? Right? Instead of just my chapstick, how do I now make sure I'm buying the hand lotion of this? How do I make sure I'm going to buy next Valentine's Day, I'm going to buy a gift basket of it? How do you make sure that you don't just become a consumer, but a brand advocate? How do you make sure that you don't just build a brand, but you build a love brand? And I worked for brands like Lindt chocolate. It's not just chocolate. It's a reward. It's a love brand. It's something that you deserve. It's not just chocolate. And I learned for so many brands that I worked on over the 2 decades of my career that it is not just a pretty ad. It is not just how the package arrives at my doorstep. It is the entire journey. And you cannot, as a marketer, just do it by yourself. You need everybody along the journey. You need everybody. You can't do it alone. It is true teamwork.
I love how you kind of come in and teach them to say, look, you can't look at this in a silo anymore. You need to look at the entire life cycle. And then you need to find that emotional connection over the course of that life cycle to begin to build and maintain a relationship with the consumer over the course of that person's life cycle with you. And I think that mentality, that perspective, and as you kind of touched on, the science, the psychology behind it, I think that's probably something that we don't spend as much time on as we should, probably because we get bogged down in minutia, we get bogged down in campaigns, and we get bogged down in busy work, as opposed to really thinking this through more holistically. So I love that that's an important place you start on. And I love because it really brings it full circle, right? Because it's a life cycle, and because that life cycle involves so many touch points at so many different places in the life cycle, that's why collaboration internally is so critically important, because so many teams play a role in touching that experience along the way, and they will continue to play a role touching that experience along the way. So again, coming back to your original point, if you collaborate, if you're able to keep the customer at the center, if you're able to consider the kind of people you're dealing with and use that system thinking to show not just a spirit of collaboration, but a spirit of respect and humility when you kind of walk in the room, then you're going to, as a marketer, be able to accomplish 10x more than you would otherwise, because you have that proper mentality from beginning to end in terms of delivering that proper customer experience. Nadja, thank you so much for being on the show today. It was an awesome conversation.
Pleasure talking with you, Shimi.